Hello everybody, Resonance here, and today I'll be giving you all my first impressions and review of some of the first revealed One Night and Karazhan cards. If you're new to Hearthstone and you'd like to support the channel, then I definitely recommend watching my Hearthstone tutorial first, link to it in the video description below. So these cards were teased just a few days ago, and they are from the upcoming Hearthstone adventure that I'm very excited to play. If there's one thing I enjoy, it's theory crafting, so my card reviews will generally be more on the optimistic side of things in a similar style to Noxious. This is because without seeing all of the new cards, it's very difficult to accurately guess how the metagame will shift and how decks will change. So during my reviews, I'll be giving you all a combined perspective from my own opinions, the opinions of various expert players, and the overall community to help us figure out just how viable these cards might be. So if you enjoyed watching this video, then please let me know by leaving a like and a comment below. I appreciate the support as always. So the first card that we're going to be looking at today is the Enchanted Raving, which is a druid card, a 1-mana 2/2 beast. This is a really interesting card because we've never seen a 1-mana 2/2 in Hearthstone so far that has no text on it like this. And you would think that this would be a massive power creep and it might cause a ridiculous shift in the metagame because we've never had a 1-mana 2/2 before. But there are a lot of things to keep in mind, and that a 1-mana 2/2 stat line might not be as powerful as it seems at a glance. So if we compare it to the standard 1-mana minions, like the Abusive Sergeant, for example, which has the very standard 2/1 competitive stat line, the only advantage that the Enchanted Raving offers over the Abusive Sergeant is the fact that the Abusive Sergeant dies to the 1 damage hero powers. It can be pinged off by them, like the mage hero power that deals 1 damage. Which is certainly a weakness of these 1 health minions, and the Enchanted Raving cannot be hero powered off, which makes it a significantly better draw in the later stages of the game. Whereas, in the later stages of the game, you're not as excited to see a 2/1 as you would be to see your Enchanted Raving. This means that the body is stickier. Still though, it's worth noting that a 2/2 for 1 doesn't really trade that much better than, for example, a 2/1 would. You still don't trade very well with 2 drops. A 2/3 doesn't really care whether or not you have that 1 extra health, and you might be able to trade into a 3/2 for 2 mana. And you still die to a lot of the 1 drops. So overall, the Enchanted Raving's biggest bonus is the fact that it can't die to hero powers. It's worth noting, though, that extra stickiness is much better than it also seems at a glance, and this is something that I neglected to think about when this card was revealed first on stream, was that this card, I think, is what's going to make Enchanted Raving a competitively viable card, or at least it's going to see, I think, some significant experimentation. Since this thing can't die to hero powers, it's very likely to survive, so if you play it on turn 1 and you play Mark of Yeshuraj on turn 2, then you end up with on turn 2 you have a 4/4, and you just drew a card. The cycle effect on Mark of Yeshuraj is very potent, and it's important to keep that in mind. That's what makes cards like Power Word Shields so good, that you don't really mind if your opponent can deal with the buff because you've already replaced the card. And that's one of the reasons why huge buff cards in Hearthstone don't usually work out, is because they're too easily dealt with by, silence effects or polymorphs, for example. But Mark of Yeshuraj already cycles, and it's cheap enough, and the Enchanted Raving is an incredibly reliable activator for it, and the rest of the Beast synergy in your Beast Druid deck. So overall, I would assume that a Beast Druid deck is at least going to be heavily experimented with, and Enchanted Raving seems like it's a viable card. Perhaps we're going to see a more aggressive Beast Druid because they'll be able to stick to the board a lot sooner. If you compare this card to Living Roots, it doesn't actually seem that good because Living Roots offers, it's still, you get 2/2 total stats from it, and Living Roots offers the flexibility of being able to deal 2 damage, which cannot be underestimated. It also has Fandral Staghelm synergy, Yogg-Saron synergy, so Living Roots seems like a better card than Enchanted Raving, but it's really the Beast tag that carries Enchanted Raving and might turn it into a actually competitive pick. Now, let's move on to the next card, which is going to be the Kindly Grandmother. So this is a Hunter card. It is a 2-mana 1/1 Beast. Death Rattle, summon a 3/2 Big Bad Wolf, which I'll show you right now is actually also a beast. This is very important to keep in mind because the most obvious comparison for this card is going to be Haunted Creeper. I need to actually shift over to Wild to show you that, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to Haunted Creeper. How do I shift over to Wild? I actually have no idea. All cards, there we go. Alright, so We're going to Haunted Creeper here as the most obvious comparison for Kindly Grandmother. Haunted Creeper is also a sticky Death Rattle beast, and this is very important for Hunter decks because you generally want to have a beast on the board by turn 4 so you can play your Houndmaster card. And this is the type of card that will really enable you to ensure that you actually get that Houndmaster synergy out in time. Still though, this card is a little slow in some aspects. Like, the 1/1 body is not actually that threatening on its own. It is a beast though, so... And I think what's going to be really obnoxious about this card, I do think it's actually going to be reasonably strong, but maybe not as OP as it seems, but I think it still will see some competitive play. What's really obnoxious about this card is compared to Haunted Creeper, if your opponent actually manages to clear out the initial body, the Haunted Creeper tokens are not actually beasts. However, this token is a beast, and this means that it's really hard to deal with things like, you know, a turn 3 kill command and whatnot. The beast synergy is just always going to be there for the hunters since this minion is so sticky, and it's very difficult historically in Hearthstone to deal with minions that have a death rattle that spawns another body, and in this case, I think that this card will be quite strong. The initial body is very weak and doesn't have that much of an impact on the board, but your opponent is still going to have to deal with it regardless because of the threat of the beast tag. In addition, I think that this card will see some play in combination with things that make the initial body more threatening, so things like Houndmaster, for example, Abusive Sergeant, Glaive Zuka, if we're talking about Wild. Those are the type of things that I expect to make this card significantly more viable, and I do think that this will see play. It's worth noting that Hunter actually already has a lot of decent 2-drops. You know, it has access to things like the King's Elec. We've even seen experimentation with things like the Flame Juggler, so I do think that this card is going to be very strong, but I don't think it will actually destroy the game. Hunter, I think it right now could use some help in the sort of like middle mana range spots, because right now it has a decent amount of powerful 2-drops at its disposal with things like Huge Toad, King's Elec, Flame Juggler, and whatnot. But what it really doesn't have is a great way to sort of bridge itself so that way it can get up to the 8 mana slot and play that Call of the Wild card as a finisher. So overall, I do think that this card will see some solid competitive play. Moving on to the next one, we have the Raving Grimoire. Now this is a really cute card. I love the artwork on it, and this is a card that I'm looking forward to experimenting with in my own decks. I think that this card is decent. Perhaps it's going to be the strongest in Arena, so yeah, always fun to see mages actually getting more strong Arena cards. Good news is, though, is that this one is a rare. I don't think that this card is actually super powerful. I mean, it adds an additional mage spell to your hand, so you have like one benefit where you're able to get, you know, more than 2 copies of a spell if you so desire, and it does let you, you know, consistently activate some spell synergy with things like Mana Worm, for example, Sorcerer's Apprentice, so it's always nice to have an additional spell, and that just seems to be a theme that Blizzard is pushing for mages. The 1/1 body itself, though, is pretty weak, and the question you have to ask yourself is it worth it to put this card in your deck? Why not just put a better spell? And it really just depends on how powerful the 1 mana 1/1 body is going to be in the context of whatever the metagame will be like. So this is a card that's difficult to evaluate at a glance, but it doesn't seem that strong to me, so we'll have to see. Perhaps it will find a home, though. And moving on, there we go. Now this card is a absolute Arena bomb. I think this card's going to be very strong in Arena. The Firelands Portal. I like the design of this card a lot. I like ones that spawn random minions, provided that you still have to pay for them. I think is very fun, and as a way to kind of keep the game fresh and expose yourself to a bunch of cards that you would otherwise never really see. So Firelands Portal is really interesting. It's a decent tempo card. The biggest drawback with this, though, is that it's going to cost 7 mana, which is it's certainly a lot of mana to spend. The good news is, though, is I think this is going to be powerful in Arena because it allows you to remove a fairly decent-sized threat. You know, most difficult to remove minions generally hang around the 5 HP mark, things like the Darkshire Councilman. So Firelands Portal will be able to kill it and then spawn another minion on the board, so it's going to be a very powerful tempo play. So I do think that Firelands Portal is a decent card. It's difficult to know, though, if it's going to see that much constructed play, only because the card is so ridiculously expensive, and the 7 mana slot for mages, generally they like to throw in Flame Strike, for example, and Firelands Portal might just be a little bit too clunky because of the high cost associated with it. We'll have to see. It's a card with some potential, and I expect it to make a relatively big impact in Arena, where players will have to play around it, but in Constructed, it's a little bit difficult to know. I am curious what the other portals will be like. And also, before I move too far on, it's worth noting with the Raving Grimoire is that compared to drawing a card, this thing doesn't contribute to fatigue, so you don't really need to worry as much about drawing through your entire deck and then losing the control matchup, so this card could be helpful in that regard, and the 1 mana 1/1 body does help deal with some 2/1 early game aggro minions, but we'll have to see. Moving on, Ivory Knight. I think this is my favorite card so far that has been revealed, and it's one that I am looking forward to the most to experimenting with. I love this card so much. Is it good, though? I am not so sure. I'm a little bit skeptical on this card. Body is very weak, so it's a Paladin card here. So we'll just go swap over to our good friend, Mr. Paladin over here. Uther. So yeah, it's a 6 mana 4/4, Battlecry, discover a spell, restore health to your hero equal to its cost. Right off the bat, this body is not so strong. We compare it to the Cult Apothecary, which is a 5 mana 4/4 that restores 2 health to your hero for each enemy minion. We already know that's not a particularly strong body. Ivory Knight, you end up paying 1 more mana for the same weak body, which is like a little bit bigger than an Antique Heal Bot. Still, though, the thing with Antique Heal Bot is that the heal is reliable. You're getting 8 HP restored to your hero each time, and one of the problems with Ivory Knight, and why at a glance I don't believe it's going to be that strong of a card, is because most Paladin spells actually don't cost very much mana, so in general, I don't think Ivory Knight's going to be healing you for too much. Look at all these 1 mana spells that Paladin has access to. Now, granted, I'm looking at the wild interface, and I think most of us are going to be playing a significant amount of standard, where there will be, no Avenge, for example, but still, most Paladin spells are actually very cheap, and the cards that you're looking to get off Ivory Knight are going to be big ones, like, for example, Consecration, Blessing of Kings. You're going to be looking for, the most obvious one, I believe, is going to be, Lay on Hands. Avenging Wrath is kind of nice to see. Enter the Colosseum. But this is the card that you want to see off this. Not only do you heal for 8 off of your Ivory Knight, but you'll also get to heal for 8 the next turn by playing Lay on Hands, which also has amazing card art. So Ivory Knight has the potential to be strong, and the nice thing with the Discover feature, and this card would be, by the way, I think this card would be very bad if it just healed you for a random spell and added that to your hand, like a random Paladin spell. That would be really bad. Thankfully, though, with the Discover effect, it will actually be more consistent, so it's possible that this card's better than I think it is. Still, though, I think that a lot of the time you're going to end up with a bunch of low-cost spells, so you're not really playing this card for the heal effect. However, being able to discover a spell is actually very strong, especially since Paladin spells in general happen to be pretty good, even the cheaper ones. So you can kind of compare it to Battlecry Draw a Card, and we look at a card like Azure Drake, which is a 5 mana 4/4, that Ivory Knight just seems like it's a very fair, balanced card. You can kind of compare Discover to Draw a Card, but it's better in some ways, and having, for example, a third equality cannot be underestimated. This is a difficult card to evaluate. I don't think the heal effect on it will be that powerful, but it's a nice little bonus to being able to discover a spell. I would like to see if I can find a home for this card. It would be very cute with Bran Bronzebeard, but so are a lot of cards, so this is an interesting one. I'm not convinced that it's super powerful at a glance, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong. I'm not super confident in all of my opinion on these cards. I'm just kind of throwing it out there and seeing what sticks. Ivory Knight doesn't seem that great, but it might find a home. We don't know how decks are going to shift. Moving on, speaking of very interesting, cool cards, we have the Ethereal Peddler. So this is a rogue minion. So he is a 5 mana 5/6. Battlecry, reduce the cost of cards in your hand from other classes by 2. Now this is a build-around effect that I love that Blizzard is sort of shifting to, rather than these sort of ubiquitously powerful neutral minions like the Piloted Shredder. Now we're moving on to things like the Ethereal Peddler, which have a build-around effect. So it looks like they're trying to push a new archetype for rogue class, where they want you to play a lot of cards like, for example, Burgle and Undercity Huckster to try and take advantage of the, taking a card from your opponent's class. Now, you're not taking it from them, you're adding it to your hand, but I like it. It's very flavorful. It's good that rogues are doing the stealing now rather than the priests. Or, well, the priests are still doing the stealing, but they both can. That's pretty cool. I think the main problem with this card, though, is that it's incredibly difficult to evaluate without seeing the other cards, because if they don't add any additional cards that allow you to, add a random class card from your opponent's class to your hand, then I don't think Ethereal Peddler is very good, because right now Undercity Huckster is a great card that has seen some competitive play. It's got the 2-mana 2/2 Death Rattle, add a random class card to your hand from your opponent's class. That's actually very good. You can kind of consider it to be a Loot Hoarder, the 2/1 Death Rattle, draw a card, except it can't be pinged off by hero powers, which is kind of nice. It doesn't also contribute to fatigue. So Undercity Huckster is a great card, and it's already seen some competitive play. And then we have a card like Burgle, which is fringe playable. It's decent. It hasn't really found that much of a home yet, but it could. And unfortunately, those are the only two cards in Hearthstone at present that we've seen that Ethereal Peddler actually has synergy with. The real question is whether or not 2 Burgles and 2 Undercity Hucksters is enough to make Ethereal Peddler actually strong, and I would say no. The 5-mana 5/6 body is a stat line that we haven't seen too much of so far. Obviously we had Pit Fighter, and we're starting to see more of those over time. And I do think that it's a very excellent stat line, but you wouldn't play a Pit Fighter in your deck. You wouldn't play a 5-mana 5/6 on its own. We're sort of shifting away from vanilla minions, and text is becoming more valuable over time, so I don't think that Ethereal Peddler will see any competitive play unless we see additional cards that have synergy with it. I'm still going to try it anyway, because honestly, reducing the cost of cards in your hand by 2, even if it's only a few of them, can be really strong. We've seen Emperor Thorson, for example, is a very powerful card, and I think the Ethereal Peddler has some potential to it. The problem is, though, is that when you're adding random cards to your hand, the value of reducing them is certainly lower, because you might not actually get anything where you really care about reducing the cost. I do think that this card's going to be crazy if you happen to get it off Renounced Darkness and Warlock, which I would love to see, so I expect that we're going to see someone play Renounced Darkness and Warlock, and then they're going to become a rogue and get a bunch of Ethereal Peddlers, and that's going to be insane, so I expect to see that on Trollden at some point. Moving on, speaking of Warlocks, we have the Imp of Malpchezaar. Now, this card I am also a little bit skeptical on. So it's a 1-mana 1/3 demon. Whenever you discard a card, draw a card. Now, it's cool to, basically every class now in Hearthstone is getting their 1-mana 1/3s. And we know that's a powerful stat line because they trade with the 1-mana 2/1s, and the body still stays on the board. This effect, though, is interesting. So clearly Blizzard is trying to push the discard Warlock synergy and really just try and turn this into a competitively viable deck like they're doing with Beast Druid. However, I feel like Beast Druid is more close to viable as is with cards like Savage Combatant compared to discard Warlock, which is fueled by primarily like Fist of Jaraxxus, Soulfire, and Doomguard, for example. There's also the what is that, that's the thing that discards 2 cards and destroy Dark Bargain, yeah. Overall, I don't know if there are enough powerful discard things to really warrant this, because the problem is that discarding a card is such a colossal drawback in Hearthstone. Even though you draw a new card, and that seems like it's a great way to compensate for that, there are a lot of situational cards you don't want to see disappear from your hand. For example, if you happen to accidentally discard a Doomguard or a Power Overwhelming, that feels really bad. You might end up discarding a Siphon Soul if you're playing a sort of weird, slower discard Warlock. You could discard your Hellfires. There are a lot of situational cards that you kind of just want to hold on to, and discarding them feels really bad. It's something that you don't have that much control over. So the only thing that really pushes this archetype into viability is going to be Fist of Jaraxxus, in my opinion, because this is the type of card that you don't mind discarding, and unless they print more Warlock cards that you don't mind discarding, then I'm not sure how strong this effect will be. It is worth noting, though, that this effect does have some very niche, powerful moments, such as when you play Doomguard, if you have this on the field. So Doomguard would normally have you, discard 2 cards, but now you'll be able to just replace them and just keep fueling the, the discard engine. Drawing a card is also a lot less valuable for Warlocks in general, because Warlocks have the hero power, where they take 2 damage and they draw a card, so Overall, it remains to be seen as to whether or not a discard Warlock will actually be viable in competitive play. I would like to see another sort of Fist of Jaraxxus style card that I think would push that over the edge. It is possible, though, that this card is actually good enough to make discard Warlock a thing, and it might just not end up running all those like crazy discard effects, and it might end up just being a variation of the classic Zoo deck that we've been playing against now for so very long. You play Imp of Malpchezaar into Succubus. I don't think Succubus will be good enough in that deck. It's kind of cute. We got Tiny Knight of Evil. We're getting there. I wonder if this is enough to push it over the edge. That remains to be seen. But right now, I am a little skeptical. Now, here's a card I'm not skeptical on. We're moving down to the bottom of the list. Check out this bad boy, Barnes. 4 mana, 3/4, neutral legendary minion. Battlecry, summon a 1/1 copy of a random minion in your deck. I actually think this card's great. I think this card's very, very powerful. And it has some great potential to see competitive play. Now, it's difficult to know that, though, again, at a glance, but I am confident in Barnes. If you look at Barnes, he summons a 1/1 copy of random minion in your deck. So let's assume that the 1 mana, the 1/1 is going to be just a vanilla, so like the worst case scenario, like it whiffs. It's actually, Barnes is still okay. He's not going to lose you the game if he whiffs, because you have to add the stats of the 1/1 to Barnes' body. It doesn't work exactly that way, but essentially Barnes is going to be a Yeti in the worst case scenario. So in the worst case scenario, Barnes is going to be a Chillwind Yeti. So he's going to be a 4 mana, 4/5, sort of. Now, it's worth noting that Chillwind Yeti used to be a card that you would actually see competitive play back in vanilla Hearthstone. Doesn't anymore, so you're not putting Barnes in your deck because he's a Yeti, but playing a Yeti is not going to immediately lose you the game. I look at cards like, for example, Fandral Staghelm in Druid as a great example of like an unassuming, not particularly powerful body that doesn't lose you the game if it whiffs, but has to be, immediately dealt with. I compare it to Fandral Staghelm. I think that Barnes will see competitive play, and you don't even necessarily need to stack your deck with minions that would be incredibly OP to get off Barnes. Like, for example, if you pull Ragnaros off this, then, oh god, you have to scroll all the way to the right. Pull Ragnaros off Barnes, it's very strong. Sylvanas, all sorts of powerful death rattles. I don't think you necessarily need to fill your deck with those cards for Barnes to be really strong, but I do think that you want to put a lot of top-heavy or death rattle things in there. But even if Barnes whiffs, he's not going to lose you the game, and that's why I think that this card is viable and will see some competitive play. I don't think this card is necessarily that insane, but I do think he will see some competitive play, and combined with synergy effects like Brand Bronzebeard, which will actually plop out 2 1/1s, I think it could be quite good. I think Barnes already has a home in like existing deck archetypes like N'Zoth Paladin, so you would put this guy in a deck with a bunch of really powerful death rattles or powerful persistent effects like you get with Ragnaros, so Barnes is really cool. I'm looking forward to playing around with this card. One of the problems with with Barnes, though, that I think might piss a lot of people off, is that this is the type of effect where if your opponent manages to pull off a Ragnaros or, like a Yesharaj, which I actually don't think I have that card, if he happens to, pull off the Yesharaj Rage Unbound, then you're pretty screwed, so you could lose the game as early as turn 4 from Barnes. So he's a very swingy effect, but a very fun and interesting one, so overall I still like his design. He feels quite good. Last card of the day is going to be the Curator. Now this is a cool card. I really feel like Blizzard has been getting a lot better at designing cards over time, and that's why I think the Hearthstone is by far one of my favorite games and the one that I still play on a daily basis. The Curator is so cool. Ben Brode compared this to the Ancient of Lore, which was a card that used to be very good before Blizzard neutered it, as they like to do. This thing used to draw 2 cards or restore 5 health. And this card used to be incredibly powerful in competitive play before Blizzard destroyed it, gave it the Warsong treatment. So the Curator is a 7 mana 4/6 body with Taunt, so it's got the Druid of the Claw body to it, which we know is an excellent body for a Taunt minion. And it has Battlecry, essentially draw 3 cards. So this is neutral legendary, Battlecry, draw a Beast, Dragon, and Murloc from your deck. If you have all 3, you just drew 3 cards. That is nuts. The body has Taunt too, which is great because even though it's a slow card because it costs 7 mana, it'll still help you survive against aggro, and it might help you stabilize. It's also a mech. The kind of decks that I'm going to experiment building are going to be so much fun. There is a lot of room here, I think, for the Curator to find a home in a competitive deck. But it's going to take some creativity. How will you build this deck? Will you build it around Alexstrasza, for example? You know, because this would allow you, for example, to play the Curator and then consistently draw Alexstrasza. Do you run only one of each of those cards, or do you run multiple copies of each? I think, though, that you would only run a few of each of these to try and take advantage of the Curator. It's worth noting that even if you don't actually have all three of these, minion tags in your deck, that it's actually still decent in its own right. So I think this card has a lot of potential. Some cards that I think will go really well with it are Stampeding Kodo. So, for example, Paladins already play this card in combination with things like Eldor Peacekeeper and Humility. And Stampeding Kodo is already very decent in this metagame that's heavily dominated by Doomsayers as an anti-aggro tool. So overall, I do think that the Curator could see some interesting play with things like Stampeding Kodo. That's the Doomsayer fellow. Oh, by the way, about Barnes really quickly. I don't know if you want to put Barnes in your deck if you happen to have Doomsayers. That could be pretty awkward. So while you don't necessarily need to build your whole deck around Barnes, you have to be very conscious that you don't lose the game off pulling a Doomsayer. That would be awful. So anyway, back into the Curator. This bad boy has the potential to draw you things like Stampeding Kodo, and then we look at Paladin, and then we have the Murloc Knight, which could be really good. So you would already kind of want to run two of those, and then you could have like a Stampeding Kodo, and then maybe like a handful of dragons like Alexstrasza. So I think that the Curator could see a home in Paladin. It's difficult to tell. This card, there's so much you can do with this card. It's also a mech. I don't know if that will be relevant. It's ridiculous. I love this card. Oh, and also, in regards to the Ivory Knight, Benroad also mentioned this. It's a card with a lot of choice to it, and I love Discover as an effect so much because of it. You know, would you ever discover anything can happen just to heal yourself for 10? I think that's going to be the mark of a good player, knowing that, sometimes it might be worth it to discover a relatively dead spell just for the massive heal. And would you put Ivory Knight in a Murloc deck to try and take advantage of that and discover another Anyfin can happen? You have a reasonable chance at getting one of these after a couple of games, so who knows? I see nothing but bright things in the future for Hearthstone, and I really like the way that these cards are designed. I can't wait to play with them, so again, let me know what you think of the card review. I hope you guys liked it. I would like to do more Hearthstone content in the future, as well as additional card reviews if you guys are interested. My favorite thing to do by far is just theory crafting, coming up with new strategies, and trying to I guess, break the meta a little bit. And these cards are exactly how I want my cards to be designed. They got the build-around effects like Reno Jackson. Speaking of which, the Curator would be excellent with Reno Jackson. So I think that's going to be one of the first things that I actually try is the Curator deck with Reno Jackson. That could be really cute. So yeah, I'm still going to be doing some Age of Empires 2 content until the end of HD's development cycle. But in the meantime, I'd really like to be able to branch out and start doing things that I also really enjoy in addition to that. So again, your support means a lot to me. I know that not all of you are super big into Hearthstone, but I need to be able to branch out in order to keep the channel afloat for a while. It's important for the longevity of it. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I really appreciate the support. If you enjoyed this, please leave a thumbs up in the comments, and I will see you all soon. You can find the live stream schedule on my Twitch page by going there and scrolling underneath the video player. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, sticking around, and being awesome. We have one of the best communities here on both YouTube and Twitch, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Thank you for watching.